Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to Bright, Safe, and Efficient, bringing electricity to Bisbee and its surroundings with historian Mike Anderson. Thank you to our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. And today is the final day of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum's Vintage Turquoise Jewelry Show and Sale. The sale will offer one-of-a-kind jewelry and ranges from earrings to squash blossoms. Don't miss this opportunity to find unique gifts for someone special in your life or to treat yourself to an exceptional piece of jewelry. This event at the museum will end today at 4 p.m. Okay. Longtime Bisbee resident Mike Anderson is the author of Warren Ballpark, a work that delves into the rich history of the playing field. He is the historian and founding member of the Friends of the Warren Ballpark in Bisbee. In addition to Warren Ballpark, Anderson's historical research has been featured in numerous journals and articles. And if you would like to ask questions during the program today, please type your questions in the Q&A chat box, and we'll gather those questions to share with our speaker after the presentation. Also, a link to the recording of today's program will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you for once again giving us an online lecture.
Thank you, Annie, for inviting me to do this. And I'd just like to remind people that Bisbee turquoise makes a wonderful gift for all of your family and friends and an incredible fashion statement when you're going out on the town. So, without further ado, I'd like to get started and telling you about electricity and how it came to Bisbee and everything around us. So, I submit to you that there have been revolutions, changes, tremendous changes in technology that have made our world much different that have occurred in the last couple of hundred years. I consider it to be three industrial revolutions. Two industrial revolutions and a post-industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution happened in the 1700s with James Watt and the first practical steam engine that made it possible to power machines and save a little bit of labor for human beings by heating up water to boiling point and using the pressure produced to move pistons and flywheels and everything else that was involved in suddenly being able to manufacture energy that is not produced by humans and animals. And then the second industrial revolution occurred in the late 1800s. But let's talk about what life was like before electricity. And to say that it was difficult and dreary would be a grave understatement. The most illumination that was produced by what they called at that time coal oil lamps, kerosene lamps, had the power of about 25% of a modern light bulb. So even with several lamps in the house, it was not easy to see things. It made for intimate dinner time meals, but it also made for poor vision and probably contributed to eye strain. So also, kerosene lamps were smoky. Kerosene lamps were also dangerous because inside those lamps was fuel and the heat source. To produce the light meant that you had to have open flame. Same thing applied to life in terms of doing work either at home, on the farm and ranch, on any particular job site. Most things were done by hand. If they weren't done by hand, they were done by steam. So steam was the primary provider of energy. For example, in the copper mines before electricity came, steam hoists to move copper ore and people around in the mines. Other than that, it was animal labor and human labor. So life was hard, especially for women. And for women at home chores just went on and on and on. For example, the Your light source was kerosene lamps. Kerosene lamps had to be cleaned, the wicks trimmed, the globes cleaned. You also had to be very careful with them so that you didn't start fires and either burn your home and your family or your business down. So, um, constant work in terms of keeping the light source available and efficient. As far as water was concerned, water came from pumps, and the pumps were manually operated by using a hand pump, and um, water had to be toted from the pump into the home constantly during the day. So, again, there was nothing but drudgery when it came to women's work and um, children's work too. Men were, of course, were the in those days primary breadwinners, so that women and children did almost all the home chores, which included hauling wood and water. And in Bisbee, where we are vertically challenged, um, lumber or firewood and any kind of building materials, but firewood for fuel and water had to be delivered on burros. So we have plenty of examples and photographs of people bringing water bags up the slopes of Chihuahua Hill or School Hill or wherever it happened to be, because people didn't have a local water supply or a safe, reliable water supply. Because in Bisbee at that time, with the urban congestion that existed in the 1890s and early 1900s, to pump water out of a well in Old Bisbee was asking for typhoid, or cholera. So um, people were relied upon wood and water being delivered by burro train. Food preparation was much more difficult. People used wood burning or coal burning stoves. They were messy, they were dirty. They took a while to get the heat up to a certain point. It was difficult to regulate heat because there's no thermostat on a wood burning stove. Uh, and it takes, again, chopping firewood, bringing in the wood, or delivery of coal, whatever it might happen to be. Heating of homes was done by stoves. And in a lot of Bisbee homes today, you'll find the remnants of a chimney, as we have in our home, that was used for providing wood burning stove before gas ranges and electrical ranges really became readily available. Washing was a horrible, horrible chore. Oh, by the way, on the right, if you see that lady over there with the smiling child playing with a cat, that woman is churning butter. So everything had to be done by hand. And food was either preserved, salted, canned, or consumed immediately fresh, because um, preserving food with refrigeration and freezing was, well, with freezing almost impossible, with refrigeration, another chore. And the way you kept food cold and safe in the late 1800s and early 1900s, before electrification, was use of ice box. Hence, we have an ice plant out by Old Douglas Road and the cemetery. And people used to bring ice in wagons to folks' homes, and the iceman would go up 150 steps in Old Bisbee with blocks of 50-pound blocks of ice to put in their um, ice box and keep food cold. So again, it's really difficult to regulate the temperature in an ice box and make sure that it's safely cold. And as time goes on and the ice melts, then you've got a problem. You have to get more ice. And there's washing and ironing. And everything was done by hand. So first you had to heat the water. Heat the water, you had to tote the wood and the water. And once you get the water hot, that's for washing. And you put your clothes in and wash them. And then you have to dump out the water. Hopefully you have somebody else heating up additional water in additional tubs so that you can do your rinse. And after you do the rinse, bluing. So at least for every load of washing, they needed 3 tubs of water heated. And needless to say, washing was an all wash day, was a complete day for women. And ironing. Ironing was done by cast iron sad irons. And if you leave it on there too long or you don't keep it clean, you get scorch marks or black marks on your clothes. Um, as soon as you get that iron out there and working on a shirt or a dress, Then that iron is cooling off and it's time to bring another iron in because you have to heat several irons up on the stove, which is heated up with water, hot water and wood used for fuel. So I think you can get the idea that everyday household chores took a great deal of time and a great deal of effort, and it also aged women prematurely. And this is going to become a major factor when electricity is introduced and electrical appliances are marketed. I think you can probably already figure out from what I've had to say to this point that electrical appliances were marketed primarily towards women. And boy, did it work. And sanitation. And we have lots and lots of examples of people. And if you want to know what life was like back in those days, go tent camping for 30 days. Take as few electrical appliances or devices as you possibly can, so you're forced to rely on either white gas or some other form of fuel, and take a bath out there in your tent, heating water. This is the way life was, using privies, which were unsanitary, smelled horrible, were incredibly uncomfortable and unpleasant to be around any time of the year, but particularly summer and winter. Summer because of the heat and the smell and black widow spiders, and wintertime because going out of your house at 2 o'clock in the morning to answer the call of nature and sitting on a frozen um, uh, privy seat was not fun. Bathtubs was the same thing washing humans as it was for washing clothes. You've got to heat up water for washing, then you've got to heat up water for rinsing. And it was almost a rule for folks who did not have servants and lots of um, money to be able to have people do things for them that they didn't want to do for themselves, that just taking a bath was a difficult, time consuming process. One time a week, usually, right before Saturday night, going to church on Sunday. So, how did this apply to Bisbee? All the houses that you see on those hills right there would have they have and on Main Street have privies, and you can see the privies right here, right there, over here on Main Street, right out on the main drag. Can you imagine? Talk about an entry statement. So privies were ubiquitous, and privies were not only did they smell, but they were also um, a contributor to disease. And we have lots and lots of examples in the history of Bisbee of outbreaks of cholera and typhoid fever and other communicable diseases that are related to unsanitary conditions. People would take their um, thunder mugs, their indoor toilets, and their little jar and slop jar, dump them out on the street or dump them down the canyon side. Bisbee must have had an incredibly bad aroma to go along with the smelter smoke and everything else back in the early days. So life in Bisbee, life everywhere was hard, dreary, and for women particularly, you're always looking at what your next chore is going to have to be. And the downside of kerosene lamps, when you have men in saloons or public places that are continually smoking cigars and cigarettes and consuming alcohol around kerosene lamps, you have the recipe for disaster. So we had frequent fires. Many of them were caused by kerosene lamps or um, open flame of some sort. But that's 1908 right there, and you can tell that it was devastating to Bisbee. It's also why we have such cool architecture today, because it all dates back from right around after this 1908 fire, the 1907 fire in Chihuahua Hill. Mining was also extremely dangerous because you're dealing with dynamite, high explosives underground. You're also, for the early miners, we're dealing with use of candles and lanterns. And we know, particularly in coal mines, but also in hard rock mining too, open flame in mines can be extremely dangerous. So premature explosions, also bad for your vision to be operating and these guys have pneumatic drills. Before that, they were using single jacks and double jacks underground, and vision was impaired by the fact that you're working by candlelight. Um, it was a dangerous environment. And that's Dr. Douglas and his family going underground with kerosene lamps. But visibility is not very good using this source of illumination. And then something happened in the late 1870s that just changed everything for the entire world. And that the first thing was that in 1879, Thomas Edison's lab, I don't think he did it himself, but his laboratory assistant certainly did. They created the first long lasting carbon filament light bulb, which made all of a sudden it possible to provide clean, bright light that didn't smoke, was consistent in terms of the brilliance, and was turned on with a flick of a switch. So all of a sudden, there's this incredible device that's available. People had already been experimenting. Michael Faraday was the first to come up with an electrical motor, but other people built on his experiments. And by the 1870s, there were lots of examples of electrical motors available. So not only to produce light, but also to run machines. And this will revolutionize everything, because not just appliances at home, but also electrical equipment that can move cages up and down in mines and do other things that took a great deal of effort and time and human labor and animal labor to accomplish before. So Thomas Edison comes up with the first practical application for electricity. And then in the 1884, Nikola Tesla, one of my favorite Serbian American immigrants, came up with the idea of alternating current. Um, Edison was using direct current, which is a far less efficient means of transmitting electricity over distances to generate light. And Nikola Tesla came up with AC, alternating current, which is the standard way that we use electricity transmission today. And George Westinghouse improved on that. And all of a sudden, we not only do we have practical uses for electricity, but we also have the means to transmit that electrical energy over long distances. And these two technological advances are going to change the world drastically in a very short period of time. Electrification became a huge, huge thing in the United States. And this is White City. This is the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And those buildings are illuminated by outdoor light. People were fascinated with electricity and illumination. Just the idea of being able to light things up became a fad. And we see this was called the White City, this Columbian Exposition. And the term was used to describe anything that was illuminated on the outside by electrical lights. And if you want to see an excellent example of what a white city would look like, go to Lakeside Park in Denver, Colorado. The amusement park there has buildings that are illuminated exactly like these buildings are. They're all outlined in electrical lights, and it's beautiful at night, absolutely beautiful. It's expensive, but it sure makes a statement. So along with this, we see rapid development of electrical grids in cities. And you had to build a power plant, a generator. Then you had to transmit the electricity by wires to whatever neighborhoods or communities that you're planning to do. Almost all electricity used in the United States in the earliest days was generated in big cities. It spread to smaller cities as time went on, but larger communities had them first, and you can see that's New York City. And look at all those wires. And what do you need in electrical equipment and to transmit electrical energy? Copper. So it is fortuitous that the discovery of technological applications for using electricity practically, in a practical sense, came along almost exactly at the same time as copper was discovered in Bisbee and a lot of other communities in the West. And that is why not only did Bisbee get the benefit of electricity, but Bisbee also helped kickstart the Second American Industrial Revolution by providing billions of pounds of copper that was used for primarily electrical devices and transmission of electricity. But Bisbee lacked electrical connection to the outside world. For 20 years after copper mining started in Bisbee, we operated by kerosene lamp and candlelight, and Bisbee streets were dark at night. Can you imagine walking around old Bisbee on a moonless night back before electricity came here and outside lighting was available? So, but in 1900, in September, Edmund B. Mason, the same guy that did the Bisbee Water Company and Bisbee Naco Water Company and was a prominent businessman in Bisbee, started canvassing the community to see who would be willing to be a subscriber or a consumer of electrical power to see if it was commercially viable to bring electricity into Bisbee. And by November, after he did his canvass and realized that there was going to be definitely a ready and willing market with all the economic prosperity of Bisbee at the time and all the businesses that were operating, that electricity would be welcomed with open arms. By November, the Bisbee Improvement Company was formed, and it was incorporated, and the directors were Walter Douglas, John Angus, Spencer Clausen, Lem Shattuck, and William Brophy. These are all prominent Bisbee businessmen, major players in Bisbee's economic community, and they knew how to set up companies. Mining companies knew how to bring in specialists. If you remember, the El Paso and Southwestern Railroad, which has nothing to do with mining directly, was created by Bisbee's predominant mining company, Phelps Dodge, and was an immediate success because the mining companies knew how to bring in specialists. They knew how to bring in engineers, equipment, and it was pretty easy for them to form the Bisbee Improvement Company. Once you do that, then the next thing you have to do is let people know what you're doing. Light, power, ice, and telephones. Those were the items that were going to be provided. So once you have electrical power, you can also set up a telephone system. So long before Ma Bell came to town, the Bisbee Improvement Company was providing telephone service. They were also, because they had an electrical power plant, they could create freezing or freeze water. They could suddenly manufacture ice. And ice in a mining town in Arizona is a very, very welcome commodity. So they started telephone service in Bisbee right after the Bisbee Improvement Company was formed. And this is an ice wagon right there, BICO, Bisbee Improvement Company. So not only did they put up power poles and do all the things necessary in order to generate and transmit electricity in Bisbee, they also provided consumer services with ice, and telephones were so welcome in town all of a sudden because Bisbee being is geographically separated by mountain ranges and steep canyons is concerned. It was suddenly much more convenient for somebody to pick up a telephone. Hello, Central, connect me with 79 or 616 or whatever. And suddenly you're talking to somebody from Old Bisbee to Don Louis or Old Bisbee to Warren or Old Bisbee to any place else. It was a real revolution. So we see there's a ready demand for electrical service in Bisbee. The company is being financed by some pretty heavy players, and they're getting lots and lots of subscribers. So they were readily able to establish a plan for bringing in electrical generating equipment, bringing in poles for stringing up the wires, and doing everything else that was necessary in order to provide light and power and ice and telephones. And here's how a power grid works. You have a generating station. This one would have been near Lowell, the original generating station, and this is it right here, just so you can see it. This is what was there. That's a cooling tower right there, both of those. And you bring in originally coal in order to produce the power. And you have a transformer that will increase the voltage of the power that's generated. And I'm not an electrical engineer. I can't describe voltage in ohms and watts and things like that. But I can tell you basically that this is how it works. That if you see a transformer system, that what they're doing is they're either stepping up the power and sending it out, or it's stepping down the power so it can be used by local consumers without blowing out their appliances and burning up their wiring system. So this is what you have today. Same thing, different technologies, different types of equipment, but the principle is pretty much the same. Boost the power, send it along the transmission lines, and then um, step it down again so it can go out to customers. And it's the generating plant. So lots and lots of railroad track nearby. The lines are right up there, so they can um, bring in coal to operate the turbines. Heat up the water. The steam would operate the turbines. The turbines would create electricity. The electricity goes out to the community. This is the earliest generating equipment in the Bisbee Improvement Company's possession. And by June 1901, electrical power was being generated by that plant, and wires had already been strung up, poles had been erected, and these are linemen for the Bisbee Improvement Company, and they're showing off. And there was an immediate demand, particularly for businesses, also for wealthier people too. And a lot of homes in Bisbee remained without water, indoor plumbing, water system, and electricity because people couldn't afford the hookups. But those that could did, because this is a wonderful change in your life. The Bisbee Improvement Company built a building very soon after that on the corner of Naco Road and OK Street that is now a commercial business. And back in the day, and until the APS moved out to the suburbs, it was the place where you paid your electric bills. It was the place where you got electrical equipment. And it was also a showroom for electrical appliances. So this is the interior of the Bisbee Improvement Company offices. The second floor of that building, which is apartments, I believe, today, at that time was used for the offices for the Bisbee Improvement Company. And you can see all these voltmeters and all of the equipment that's necessary to determine how much electrical power a person used, meters and wire and everything else was had to be warehoused and stored either in near the power plant or near the workyard or in the offices. And they began to wire up Bisbee to an electrical grid. Again, there's the ice wagons, but they also had service trucks by that time so that they could take a crew out if something needed to be set up, needed to be repaired, because you're always dealing with power outages. That's one, as we all know, during times of bad weather and also during times of not bad weather, that you can have people run a car into a power pole or something burns out, you got to go out and fix it. And so immediately after June 1901, you start to see photographs of Bisbee with power lines and power poles. This is Main Street. I believe that's St. Elmo right there. There's the library. And this is Brewery Gulch. And the primary purpose for electrical lighting was for the city of Bisbee, after it was incorporated, and made an agreement to get power light poles put up so that you would have illumination for the streets of Bisbee at night. And the businesses were the very first things to be wired. The Orient Saloon opened with this massive electrical display, hundreds of light bulbs in different designs. And on the 4th of July, 1903 or 1902, the plaza around where the library and post office and the old Phelps Dodge Mercantile were in the PD offices were all lit up with red, white, and blue displays. People just loved illumination. They were fascinated by it. And they started demonstrating appliances. At the Bisbee Women's Club, there was um, a big demonstration of all the different electrical appliances that were available, labor saving appliances. And this was a hot point iron that was on display. They also had washing machines, they had all kinds of things. Um, and women were just absolutely enthralled with the idea of I don't need to heat up water, I don't need to heat up irons, I don't need to do all these things. I can just flip a switch and do my thing. So the Bisbee Improvement Company also pushed electricity for storekeepers. If you want people to think you're up to date, you want to have people be able to see your products, put electrical lighting in your business. And then one of the most time consuming and energy consuming chores for women was washing clothes. So an electric washer, it may have a wringer, but the only physical energy you're going to have to put into doing those clothes is turning that crank for the wringer to wring out your clothes after they've been washed. Electricity also made it possible for suburban life in Bisbee. Without the Warren Bisbee Street Railway, it would have been impossible to have communities like Warren and Lowell and Don Louis and all the other outlying areas, Tintown, South Bisbee, connected, where people could go back and forth to work and shop in different parts of town because Old Bisbee is 4 miles from Warren. And it's a 6 mile trip from Old Bisbee out to Don Louis. So it's a long, difficult um, process to get from point A to point B until streetcars came along. And what are streetcars using for their principal or for their means of locomotion? Electricity. And automobiles, internal combustion engines as they were designed in the early 1900s could not have operated without electrical spark produced by a spark plug. So electricity made it possible also to have an efficient, practical, and cost-effective internal combustion engines that propelled horseless carriages, which made another transportation revolution possible, the automobile age. And we see a drastic change in entertainment because of electricity. Without electricity, there would be no motion pictures. So when Thomas Edison's company came to Wilcox in 1897 to show their electrical or their first practical movie projector, which just shocked and fascinated people. The first time that a movie was shown in Cochise County was in Wilcox in 1897. You had to have an electrical power source in order to be able to propel that. And a few years later, when Guglielmo Marconi came up with the idea of radio transmission and technological changes allowed for voice and music to be transmitted through the air through radio waves, you needed to have electricity both to transmit that signal and to receive the signal. So again, we see a tremendous change in the way people entertain themselves as a result of electricity. Now, in homes, they still had wound up gramophones, spring-loaded wind-up gramophones, but that's going to change too when much more efficient electrically amplified systems are developed in the 1920s. And in 1925, a new player came to town, Arizona Edison, which was part of the great electrical empire that was developing all over the United States. And they bought up the Bisbee Improvement Company and the Douglas Improvement Company and used the same players. They didn't change hardly anything here to begin with. This is a power plant built out by NACO, and it's very close to where the Wilson Ranch is today and where the water company properties are. So Arizona Edison takes over in 1925 from the Bisbee Improvement Company. And this is one of the most interesting people in the world of electricity. He was a Norwegian immigrant from Trondheim, northern part of Norway, Ingevald Andreas Rosak. And he came here in about 1910 and was um, assigned as an electrician, became the chief electrician, and later the manager of the Bisbee Improvement Company. And when it was bought up by Arizona Edison, they just said, "You're still in charge, dude. So do your thing." And he kept the lights on and the power flowing in Bisbee up into the early 1930s. He and his wife Dagmar um, built this building, which is at 48 Shearer above the Central School, and that's the Rossack Apartments. If you go to Evergreen Cemetery, the biggest structure in the cemetery is the Rossack Mausoleum at the far northern end of the cemetery. Big white mausoleum with white pillars, even bigger than George Warren's memorial. But this was Ingevald Rossack's apartment building. And in 1952, Central Arizona Light and Power Company, CALAPCO, merged with Arizona Edison and formed Arizona Public Service. And this is the building that I told you about that the Bisbee Improvement Company built right by the fire station, right by City Hall, right where the Tower of Power was in Bisbee in the early days. And this was still in up until not too long ago, APS's headquarters before they moved out to the burbs. So this was the offices, and this was where customer service and the showroom on the side over here was located. And they became APS, and APS, of course, still provides services today. Now, that takes care of Bisbee. But in rural America, things hadn't changed that much. If you were wealthy, you could afford to buy a generator for your big ranch or for your commercial farm, or in smaller communities, you could, just like Bisbee, develop your own generating power system. But in the rural areas, places that were less than 5,000 people, including farm and ranch country, there was no electricity. So animal power provided the primary form of harvesting crops and developing your farm or your ranch. Most labor was done by human beings toting things, and it was very, very difficult, and lighting was poor. And just like in larger communities, farm and ranch work was horribly difficult for women. Women aged much more quickly than they do today. So if you're a ranch woman, you're not only doing the same chores you would if you were living in a city, but you're also tending to chickens and doing other farm chores that your husband doesn't have time to do. And his work, because it was all manual, was incredibly difficult too, and dangerous because you're using kerosene lamps in barns full of hay, for example. Recipe for a bad fire if you don't take care. So by the 1930s, 90% of Americans who lived in cities larger than 5,000 had electricity in their homes or their apartments. The opposite was the case in rural areas. In communities of 5,000 people or less, 90% of people did not have electricity in their homes. So you had two Americas basically in terms of standards of living. You had the first world, which had electricity and labor-saving devices and electric light. And the rural communities, you had privies and kerosene lamps and everything done, bathing, cooking, ironing, all the chores done by hand. So what's interesting is that Arizona actually had a higher percentage of people that did have electricity in rural areas. And part of that had to do with the Roosevelt Dam and electrification projects that were going up as a result of reclamation programs. Depression made things even worse. And then on the left is a farm auction that happened when farm commodity prices dropped to the point where farmers dumped their milk out, destroyed their crops because it wasn't worthwhile to harvest or to try to sell because you didn't make enough money. And thousands of farmers, tens of thousands of farmers, were forced to flee their homes because their homes were foreclosed or the Dust Bowl, and things were just really, really bad in rural America in the 1930s. Horrible. And then in 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected and um, coined the expression New Deal to indicate that things were going to be different. And what he wanted to do was appeal to rural Americans as far as we're going to change things for you. We're going to make your life better. And one of the things that they came up with was the idea of rural electrification. So in 1934, the Tennessee Valley Act was passed, and what that did was provide a large irrigation, flood control, and hydroelectric power program in one of the poorest parts of the United States, the Tennessee Valley. So you had these beautiful rivers in Tennessee and the surrounding area, but the communities that were around them were desperately poor. So they came up with this plan to build dams, flood control, and the priority for the sale of electrical power that would be generated through the dams would go to states, counties, municipalities, and cooperative organizations of citizens or farmers, not organized for doing business or profit, primarily for the purpose of supplying electricity to its own members and citizens. And this was the seed for rural electrification. This is the idea that, you know what, we can do public works, provide money to build dams and to do other things that will be able to provide electricity to people that never had it before. And a year later, the Rural Electrification Act was passed and the Rural Electrification Administration was created. REA was the act, the REA was the administration. And this was met with skepticism by a lot of folks who thought, you know, it's the government. You know, they're always saying they're going to help, but they didn't. But this was a novel plan. And the idea was that people were going to help themselves, that communities would mobilize, they get the money from the government, but they do the electrification basically themselves. And what the REA did was they went out and they promoted the idea of electricity. And I love this quote. This was someone in Tennessee who stood up in church giving witness. I want to tell you this, brothers and sisters, the greatest thing on earth is to have the love of God in your heart, and the next greatest thing is to have electricity in your house. And when you hear somebody say something like that, and they're not coming from the government, the word of mouth spread. The REA also publicized electrification as it was done from community to community. And when folks realized this is actually happening, they're putting in electrical grids in the county next over or the state next over, we can have this too. Suddenly the idea steamrolled, and all over the United States, people organized themselves. And what they had to do was to develop um, a list of people that wanted electricity. So they went out and they petitioned people. If you want to sign up for this, you pay a $5 cooperative membership each year. And that membership is going to make you a stakeholder in the power company. This is not for shareholders. This is not for people with a lot of money. This is for us to build this electrical grid and maintain this electrical grid, to sell electricity to ourselves at reasonable prices, and to use any money that we have left over to maintain the system or to expand the system. And so this thing grew like wildfire. The REA went out and showed women, just like the Bisbee Improvement Company did, rural women, this is how you use an electric mixer. This is how you set your lamps to illuminate your home. This is how you use an electric oven. And people began to realize we can do this here. And what would happen was that a community such as in Cochise County or in New Mexico or wherever would develop a large enough list of people that were willing to become members of the co-op. They would then incorporate and apply for a loan, low interest, long-term loan that was affordable, that allowed people to develop the capital on their own to be able to build an electrical grid and a power generation system. And this is the fella that he generated the enthusiasm. This is Mark Bliss, who was the agricultural extension agent for Cochise County in Wilcox. He was approached by the REA about the getting an electrical grid started here in rural Cochise County. He went out and talked to ranchers and farmers and explained this is real, this will really work. And they already trusted him because they knew this guy was out there to help them. And he held a meeting down by Double Adobe in 1939 and got people together and said, we can do this. We can build an electrical system. The government will provide us with a loan and we can have this thing going. We can build electric generator. We can have pumps that can get water out of the ground so that all of a sudden Cochise County's valleys can bloom. And this is what happened. So the Sulphur Springs Valley Co-op was established in 1939 as an incorporated entity, and they received a major loan from the Rural Electrification Agency. And they started mapping out grids, and they used women for this. They had women go out and talk to women and say, this is going to be a big change in your life. They contracted, but they also used their own sweat equity to help build this system. So a co-op such as Sulphur Springs Valley Electric Co-op would develop. Members of the co-op would go out and help the crews survey, map out the grid, to put the poles in place, and do everything else under supervision of electrical engineers and with technical assistance from the REA. This is an incredible story about how they put these poles out there, and most of it was done by brute labor and with some heavy equipment, and they set up a grid so that and after you get the poles up and you get the wires strung, you also need a generating station. They were originally going to put the generating station up by Wilcox, realized that a better place would be down near McNeil. So they built a massive, because McNeil had access to natural gas. And so they built the plant down there. It is now, of course, the Fiesta Chili Factory. And in 1940, in November, this lady, and she was the Sulphur Springs Valley Cooperative Electric Co-op Board Secretary, Mrs. C.M. Bird. She flipped the switch to energize the grid and to start power flowing into Elfrida and McNeil and Double Adobe and all the communities up there in the Sulphur Springs Valley. And that's the original power plant, which is now part of Fiesta Cannery. And this is what resulted from that. The ability to use electrical pumps to get water out of the ground and do efficient job of irrigating. And suddenly Cochise County, Sulphur Springs Valley bloomed. And it brought irrigating water, and that's high capacity pumping system. It also brought electricity to homes that allowed for electric fans and radios. Kids out in Elfrida could suddenly hear the Lone Ranger on the radio. It's a transformative moment. And they kept expanding the system and getting more loans from the government. They pay back the loans, but this is one of the Sulphur Springs Valley Electric Co-op employees going out and riding the potential line to see what would be the best way to route electrical power poles and wires. And they had to get permission, of course, from the property owners who were originally reluctant and then realized, if I want to have electricity, I need to give these people a little bit of my land in order to be able to run their power system through. And this was the very first Sulphur Springs Valley Electric Co-op SSVEC repair truck. It was made up of odds and ends. It was called the Hesperus after the wreck of the Hesperus. And they'd send that out to places that needed to have repair work done. So this is where Sulphur Springs Valley Electric Co-op first worked. And this is where, by late 1940s, these were the areas that were being served and the areas that were being expanded on. So it grew very quickly. And now it distributes power in 4 counties. It goes into Pima County. It goes into, it provides power in Patagonia. It provides all the power except for Bisbee and Douglas, remember they were part of their own improvement companies, which were bought up by Arizona Edison, which was swallowed by Arizona Public Service. So Bisbee and Douglas are powered by APS. Fort Huachuca is powered by Tucson Electric Power, TEP. When Fort Huachuca expanded drastically in the early 1940s, they put out a contract bid um, or a request for bids, and TEP won the bid to provide power for the fort, and they still do. And then also down in this part of the county, it's provided by somebody else, and we'll get to that in a second. But SSVEC provides power into Graham County. It provides power into Santa Cruz County, provides power into um, Pima County, and most of Cochise County. And these are cooperatives. You are a member, you are an owner of this system. There are no shareholders, there are members. So it really is power for the people and power to the people. The electricity benefits are, it's a no-brainer. Labor saving. The things that can be done with a small electric motor, the things that can be done with electric stoves and light. So farmers and ranchers were happy to have it. In 1961, APCO came about when four of the local rural electric co-ops in Arizona formed the Arizona Electric Power Company or cooperative. And so by 1963, there was a massive power plant with a 75 megawatt steam unit that went online in the area just to the southwest of Wilcox and just a little bit north of Pierce. The Apache Power Plant, still there today, cranking out that electricity. There it is. And it uses a variety of energy forms, and they're getting more and more away from fossil fuels and headed more and more towards wind and um, um, solar. Now, the other company that provides power for Cochise County started in Columbus, New Mexico in 1947, and that was the Columbus Electric Co-op. And this is its service area. This is the state line, and if you notice, it goes into port. It provides power in Portal and Cave Creek, and also down here around Apache and Chiricahua. So the reason for that is when folks in that area who at that time were reliant on generators in the big ranches and farms or at the Southwest Research Station, but everybody else is on kerosene and everybody else is off the grid. They asked for Sulphur Springs Valley Electric Co-op to come in. It would not be cost effective to run transmission lines all the way around the Chiricahuas. They asked APS and they gave them the same answer. And Columbus said, we can do it. We're moving in that direction anyway. They started from here originally, moved their way west. And by 1951, they reached Animas and Rodeo, but Rodeo had a commercial provider already, a guy named Ray Eddington that had two generators there that were always shutting down and were very expensive. So Columbus wanted to come in. They could not come into Rodeo. They could get around Rodeo and cross the state line into Arizona, where today, if you live in the Portal area in Cave Creek, you pay your electric bill to an office in Deming, New Mexico, not in APS or Sulphur Springs Valley. And Columbus, again, expanded across the state line in 51, so they serve those areas in Cochise County. And in 1963, they were able to get power into and replace Ray Eddington and Rodeo because the New Mexico State Supreme Court said if these people are dissatisfied with their service, this co-op can come in. And co-ops keep the lights on all over rural southeast Arizona and southwest New Mexico in areas that are sparsely populated, in towns that are as small as Animas and Hachita and Rodeo and Portal and San Simon and Bowie and all those other towns. And I'd like to dedicate this talk to someone who lived in our house back in the 1980s, 611 Hudson here in Warren. Ron Mattingly, married to Roseanne Mattingly. Both Ron and Roseanne were extremely oriented towards doing things in the community. Roseanne was Woman of the Year. Ron was city council person, and he was electrocuted on the job in 1990. And no matter how careful you are, a bad day working as an electrician can be your last day. And I just like to, if you see an electrician over at mornings having a cup of coffee with his friends, go up and shake his hand and tell him thanks for being custodians of modern civilization. They may look at you funny, but after they realize you're serious about it, electricians keep the lights on, and electricity is what keeps the modern world going. And without electricity, the modern post industrial revolution involving digital technology and computers could not have taken place. So, electricity is the game changer. And that's the story.
And a good story it is, sir. Thank you so much. We do have questions for you.
Great.
Um, do you feel that electricity would have been brought to Bisbee so soon if it were not for the support of the mining company?
Absolutely not. The main game players, if you'll notice, Lemuel Shattuck, Billy Brophy, Walter Douglas, those folks, and Spencer Clausen, they were all about mining. So I think mining companies were instrumental in bringing electricity out here, and they formed the Bisbee Improvement Company. So yeah, I think it would have been longer coming had they not gotten involved, because they had the capital, they had the expertise, they had the connections to set up a new company and make it work. Absolutely.
And was getting electricity and electric appliances an unequal occurrence, at least initially?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Folks that lived up on Chihuahua Hill and Tin Town and in Zacatecas would be the last ones. As a matter of fact, I think there were still some folks off the grid as far as the 70s in some of the areas in Bisbee that providing power and electrical appliances, I mean, you need money to do it. And if you don't have the money, you're still using kerosene lamps and you're still buying wood. So, yeah, it would have been an unequal distribution, especially originally. And rural electric co ops really leveled the playing field for people too, making power inexpensive. So, there's that.
And do you know by chance when we see the delivery of ice stopping for ice boxes by chance?
I wish I knew. Probably by the 1930s, we would have seen ice boxes replaced with refrigerators in most homes in Bisbee. And for those who didn't have ice delivered, they could probably go get it. So, but we had a big old ice plant right by the cemetery. That's what that
It,
was.
indeed, we did. And just as a side note, my father said that he remembered having an ice box as a kid.
I
Uh,
wouldn't be surprised. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it just depends on how close you are to the nearest connection, how much you're willing to pay. And what the electric co-ops did was that they reduced the cost of getting that connection. Today, it's incredibly expensive to have your home out in a rural area connected by electricity. People do it, but they go into Huck in order to be able to finance it a lot of times. So almost everybody, except for a couple of Luddites in Cochise County, are now on the grid. And I remember some of the last ranches in the southeastern part of the state, around by the Peninsular Mountains, that finally got electricity in the 1990s, and what a big deal that was.
And I think we have one more question. And I think you've already answered this at least partially. So, was it expensive for homes and businesses to become electrified in Bisbee's initial electrification?
I think, relatively speaking, it probably was. Um, you save labor and you attract more customers if you're a business person. When you have a fancy electrical chandelier in your saloon, you're far more likely to get people, I think, to come in and look at that and drink and gamble. So I think probably the original cost was higher, especially when you're first developing an electrical grid, but there's also advantages to it. So you pay now and you get more later, I think.
Mike, thank you again for providing another fantastic online program for our audience today.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell this shocking story.
And for those of you who joined us, thank you all for joining us. And now that Mike's program is over, it's time to hop in your car and head on over to the Turquoise Jewelry Show and Sale. You have about 4 more hours to find your next stunning piece of jewelry.
Because nothing says it like turquoise.
Exactly, Mike. Exactly. Well, again, thank you, Mike, and thank you to our audience. We hope to see you at another online program again soon. Bye, everyone.
Adios.